I enjoyed it. I was very relaxed. Quinton made me feel very comfortable. I would thoroughly recommend it to anyone that is wanting to expose themselves a little bit more. Interesting concepts that Quinton's got. So, yeah, I look forward to continuing a connection.
Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Fan of the Brand. It's your host Quinton here, and today we sit down with Lyndon Dyson, founding director of Wizard Pharmacy and a pharmacist with over 40 years of experience in the industry. Now, Wizard Pharmacy is a franchise making waves here in WA and is on a mission to enhance the quality of life through science and nature-based wellness solutions with a unique collaboration of pharmacists and naturopaths working together to find the best solution for its customers. Now, in our sit down, Lyndon shares it was a conversation with a good friend who introduced him to his now career and how that friend then became a mentor through the years, to which he owes much of his success today. So I really want you guys to pay attention to this interview, because whether you're a graduate watching this and you're just starting your career in pharmacy, or you're a business owner who is looking to grow, scale and expand, there's something in this sit down for everyone. So with no further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy this amazing interview with the director of Wizard Pharmacy, Lyndon Dyson. Enjoy. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks very much.
But I'm excited to get into a bit of your story, and really just want you just to take us a bit of a background for those who are watching. What was your upbringing like from where you were to where you are today?
Well, born in Fremantle, not a Fremantle supporter though, West Coast Eagles supporter. From those early days, my parents, or my father, was working for the public service. He was in the Transport Commission, and my mother was a stay-at-home mum in those days. Both had been in the services, so they met during the war. Moved into Como, built a house there back in the late 50s. It would have been the late 40s, sort of thing, about 48. And that was my family home for 21 years. And then I married, moved out of that house, started a family sort of thing, and progressed down the line. Did pharmacy when I was 17 years of age, qualified. In those days it was a 3-year study course and a full year of 2,000 hours of practical work in pharmacy. That was out at Waite in those days, which now is Curtin. And that sort of ended up basically with me also going back to Curtin and opening my first pharmacy there when I was a 27-year-old. Oh, wow. So that was an interesting sort of return.
So I'm interested as to how you transitioned from school to, was pharmacy on your mind when you were in school, or was that just an opportunity?
No, actually it wasn't. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after my leaving. And I was pondering whether I wanted to be a doctor. I had an uncle who was a dentist, so he was sort of talking to me about dentistry. And I had this mate who was going up to Waite in those days to register for pharmacy. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, that's when you get to own a pharmacy, run a chemist shop. And I said, oh, really? Okay, I might come along. And I was talking to him on the way up there, and I thought, no, this doesn't sound too bad. I may as well register for this as well and see what happens to the thing. And then over a period of the next 2 weeks, I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. And he had a mate that was a year older than us, and he introduced me to him, and he was already 1 year into the course, and he sort of pretty well convinced me to sort of do pharmacy, and I thought, yeah, this would be something that I would quite like, and started from that point forward sort of thing. And that particular friend, the one who was a year older, he had quite a strong influence on me, particularly in my pharmacy years. He was, being a year ahead, he helped me a lot to understand how to sort of manage work lifestyle studies, which is quite traumatic change from high school to uni. I'm sure most people have done that. Getting used to the socialisation and alcohol and all those sorts of things that go on. Qualified since 1973, so getting into sort of that fifth, well and truly towards the end of the fifth decade. I've sort of really enjoyed the period. It's a very, very dynamic industry, lots of change. The role that I've chosen in community pharmacy is incredibly diverse. You sort of really have to be a jack of all trades to sort of pick up on market trends. There's the professional services side, so in the core clinical areas, or there's also the retail side as well. And I was very fortunate in those early years in my career. I sort of got the privilege, I suppose, of being what was considered a key account with the old FH Holdings. It's now Symbiont Rebos. And in those days, they used to run about every 4 months a trip around Australia for key clients and introduced us to really specialist retailers, data management people, marketeers. So I learned a lot in that period. It was about a 6-7 year period. That was really sort of my personal development, sort of...
Like a traineeship into...
Yeah, it was really an upping of the skills and understanding sort of thing, and yeah, that helped me a lot to sort of get me through to where we are now.
Yeah. What was your first job?
I managed a pharmacy over in Kooyong Road in Rivervale. It was just an independent store. It had been there since pre-war, I think.
Okay.
And the fellow who owned that store, he was a Lions member, but quite sort of high up in the Lions Club, and he used to travel a lot, so I was left with that store pretty well by myself from the very first day I got there. So I was a 21-year-old when I sort of came in as a manager. There's some very capable staff in that store at the time, and I learned a lot by having to sort of work within that environment. It was a very busy store. I did my qualifying hours in a much smaller store, so it was a bit of a culture shock when I think the first day, from doing 30 scripts a day in the place I did my hours to doing 330 on the first day I was there. It was just blow away. I had to learn very quickly how to cope in that transition, because that was in the old days of just a typewriter and licking labels.
Oh my gosh.
There was no computers in those days when I first started.
And you're managing staff as well?
Yep.
So was that
had about 12 people in that store at that stage, so it was a very busy store. Yeah, it's still trading today. It's still a very profitable store today, I believe.
So 21 years of age, you put into the managerial role to manage that pharmacy, and then from there, when did you get the entrepreneurial bug?
I think I always had it. I think that fellow that I was telling you about, the fellow that was a year older than me, his name was Chaz de Boer. Unfortunately, he was killed in the Tracy cyclone. He was up there with his wife, who was also a pharmacist, and he was one of the deaths in that. But he was very influential to me in the sense of teaching me a lot of the commercial side of pharmacy, and taught me what was a good deal from a company and what was a bad deal. And he spent a lot of time with me sort of around that. So I learnt a lot from him. So when I was sort of about 25, I think I was. 25, that's right, about 4 years after I qualified, I decided to open that pharmacy back at Curtin on a peppercorn rent of $500 a year for the whole site, which was run by the Student Guild in those days. And I believe that pharmacy is still going, actually. I'm pretty sure it's still open. Not 100% sure. I know it was a year or two ago, but I've got a funny feeling it might have had the PBS number relocated down into Karawara. But that was quite a successful store, and it had unusual trading hours because it was living within semesters and things like that. So once again, it was a pretty busy store, so learned a lot about younger generation and their demands, etc. So it was a lot of fun there too. The next site that I got involved with was out in Kelmscott, in a centre that's now Kelmscott Stargate, but in those days it was Kelmscott Plaza. And we opened up a pharmacy news agency 7 days a week, extended hours. Times were a bit tight in those days, because that was, when was that? That would have been back in around about late 70s. So there'd been sort of pretty hard trading times in the early part of the 70s with some recessions and things like that. And I just worked my butt off in that store, 7 days a week sort of thing, horrendous hours. Finally got the position we could settle it and sort of have another chemist come and sort of work with us, and still have that as a franchise store today. And so that still is a very strong store. It's not so dominant in the news agency product, but still sells magazines and papers and a bit of stationery and things of that nature. But that was an interesting diversification, I suppose. Once again, sort of honed other retail skills around different product ranges.
Would you recommend that transitioning first to working for a company first and getting your feet wet before making that step?
I think for young fellows, like, pharmacy is incredibly capital intensive nowadays. When I sort of started, I was involved with another fellow, and we had, I think, 3 businesses, and we had roughly $30,000 each. We had a bank loan of $30,000. Now, to set up a pharmacy these days, you're talking anywhere between $1 and $2 million.
Yeah.
So it's quite a dynamic change from where it was back then. I think for a young person coming into the industry, depending on what track they want to go, whether they want to go clinical into hospital or if they want to go into community, and that's really a personal choice as far as their own satisfactions, in the sense of what they really want to contribute. Once they've made that decision, then the best thing is to seek out best operators and go and try and work for them. And that's what I did when I was younger. I always tried to work shifts when I was on relief work, etc., to work with somebody who was creating a bit of a path in the industry at the time. So I worked from some interesting people. When I used to travel over east, I always tried to connect with people that I'd been made aware of that had strong trading locations or a unique offer that I wanted to sort of go and talk to and find out what they would do. I always had an adage whenever I went over east to try and find one idea that could make enough money to pay for my trip and accommodation. So that was always sort of an interesting challenge. But I got involved in those days with the two core directors of Pharmacy 777, Michael Dillon and Ian Hamilton, and we changed our trading name at Kelmscott to be Pharmacy 777. I think we were in those days also associated with Amcal, which is a Sigma brand. And I used to sort of work on behalf of the 777 group, and there's about, I think, 12 pharmacies trading under a commonality of 777 Amcal. And I used to do most of the inventory procurement and a bit of the marketing in those days for that sort of group of pharmacies. And then Ian Hamilton and Michael Dillon decided to sell their pharmacy in Garden City. So I acquired that. And from there I acquired the other pharmacy in Garden City about 5 years later. So I ended up with owning the two pharmacies in Garden City. And then I've had some associates on the way that have been assisted in their penetration into pharmacy by myself, advice, financial support, things like that, to try and get further growth.
And was it as just a product of the result of what you've accumulated throughout your past career?
I think I've sort of gone on an extended journey. It's funny because we were doing a bit of a brand presentation, and I talk a little bit about where I sort of started in my career, and I sort of go through a period where I sort of tried a lot of the wholesaler brands that have been around. And I make a statement that I think part Priceline, I've been in every brand that was available at the time then, created a few little brands myself, etc. And I sort of classified the 80s and 90s as my dancing with the devil days, where I considered that those wholesaler brands never really satisfied the needs that I wanted sort of to deliver in my pharmacy. And I've always been very data driven and very consumer centric. So I've always wanted to try and satisfy my customer outcomes. And I go right back, like I think back when I was working in Kelmscott, that's sort of a bit of a remote area at the back of Kelmscott, and particularly in those days. And I'd finish at 9 o'clock and I'd have a script that had come in sort of from the warehouse, and you'd jump in the car and go with your lights on trying to find a driveway in the bush up Rollystone Way, and I'd spend an hour sort of going and doing an after hours delivery and making sure the patient got their medication and they were happy and they understood it and all that sort of stuff. That sort of thing was just part and parcel of pharmacy. I'm not saying that I'm any hero, don't get me wrong, that was the way pharmacy worked in those.
Delivery, that's you. That's the service that you provide. Yeah,
you had to have a real care bone. You had to really sort of be very conscious about customer satisfaction. And I think all the pharmacists that I went through in those years in particular had that element of focus. And you always sort of started off in pharmacy with the expectation that you would end up owning a pharmacy. I don't think that's current now. We do a bit with the students. I don't think a lot of the students see that that's necessarily a pathway for them. I think the capital intensive nature of the industry sort of changed probably a lot of that for some of the guys and girls. And when I say girls, pharmacy's much more dominant now. I think it's about 65-70% female graduates. So it's quite different. But I've always held that as a core element of sort of my sort of business focus and that need to sort of understand data to the nth degree and satisfy customers' needs.
So you data-centric?
The areas that I really say are paramount is knowing and understanding your customer, knowing and understanding your team, and knowing and understanding your data. If you get those three elements right, I think that puts you on a pretty strong pathway for success. There's lots of tentacles that come off those three areas that you really have to follow down. Sometimes you get lost in rabbit holes, and particularly in data, I've done that a few times, and you burn a few dollars, but you learn by the experience. And they're the three critical areas to me that you really need to sort of be focused in.
I'm interested to get your perspective, Lyndon, on leveraging on outsourcing, right? Because especially when you're at the helm, pressure gets to you and there's responsibilities. How fundamental is having that core team?
The capacity of your team, I think that's really important to understand that capacity. So it's all very well to say, look, I want to go and get growth and do things, but can your team really handle the growth? Do you have the right skill set amongst the team? And you need to recruit accordingly, or if not, train your resources to sort of accommodate it. So critical. And outsourcing, I've spent many hours with consultants. I go back 35, 40 years, and I started getting engaged with consultants all the way through the recent change to Wizard back in about 5, 6, 7 years ago, when we sort of dropped Wizard Warehouse because we were trading as Wizard Warehouse. That was prior to Chemist Warehouse coming into the state. I wanted to make a change to get out of the way of what I consider as a steamroller that would be incredibly dominant, which they have become in the price and product area. So we made a decision to sort of reach out to some consultants, and there's an Eastern State Sydney-based organisation called Retail Oasis, and the fellow that ran that was a bloke by the name of Stephen Collar, and he came over and spent a day with us reviewing our stores, and we engaged him. We spent 2.5 years on developing what has become the current Wizard Pharmacy franchise. So I've done a lot of work with consultants, and I have no problem in reaching out and outsourcing. We do a bit of outsourcing with our back-end office support. So we have some team working in the Philippines and also India to assist in that area, and that's just for economies that we need to sort of make sure we can sort of meet market and deliver the outcomes that we require.
I want to pick your brain in terms of family and starting a business for entrepreneurs and such as yourself. How did you manage to navigate through that initially when you were starting off?
I had probably the benefit of a father who was very, very firm on saying to me, make sure you do your studies early. Do not do what I had to do and complete studies when you're older and you have family.
Gotcha.
From that, I sort of had an adage where I always tried to not take work home, even if it meant me staying back in the pharmacy for another hour or so, rather than taking it home and breaking my time from the family. So I found that really beneficial. It kept a pretty good lifestyle balance sort of thing in between the two. So that became a strong rule of thumb. That probably doesn't apply so much now. So if my wife ever watches this, she'll say, well, that's all bullshit, it's going out the window. But in the early days, I was sort of pretty focused around not taking work home that disrupted the family.
I know that you are in a competitive market with the other, as you mentioned, Chemist Warehouse. So how do you stay, not so much relevant, but what's your unique
I think
angle?
Most times at the beginning of a year, I sort of coin a word for the team.
Yeah.
And I think the year before COVID, or as COVID started, was the word challenge. Which wasn't designed to be as challenging as it had turned out in that particular year. And this particular year, we had the word differentiation.
Nice.
So over this particular period, and with the assistance of COVID, it has been quite an incredible journey in the context of our differentiation. So we've done a lot in making sure that we stand out quite differently to other brands. And I come back to those core sources that I was sort of saying before, knowing your customer, knowing your team, and knowing your data.
Yeah.
So I've really worked those areas hard to try and bring about product ranges that sort of differentiate us to what a Chemist Warehouse has or other pharmacies. So that site I was telling you about in Casuarina, we're going in there with quite large product ranges, but they're quite different to what Chemist Warehouse has. Because in Darwin, I think half the pharmacies are Chemist Warehouse. There's about 22, 23 pharmacies up there. and there's about 12 Chemist Warehouse, so it's an interesting exercise to go and compete against them in that environment. Having your people to be able to be focused in particular areas around your customisation or your personalisation for your customer, those sorts of areas, I think is really important. So yeah, we've done a lot in that data analytics sort of thing. We use Salesforce as our CRM. We have a very, very well qualified administrator now. I think he's probably the highest qualified Salesforce administrator in the state. Anybody out there, you're not allowed to pinch him because he's exceptional at adding a lot to our customer journeys, etc. So we're getting major advantages, and we're really starting to get down to very fine elements where we can actually look at a person's purchasing history and determine a particular disease state or a condition that they may have, that we might have some interesting health content that we can serve to them in such a way that it's engaging to get them interested in coming and talking to us. But more importantly, it's got beneficial outcomes. It's all clinically based. We don't do anything unless we've got good clinical evidence on any recommendations that we make. So that's an interesting part that we're just starting to get into now. We've run a few test outcomes where we did one on sleep, people with sleep problems, where we identified about 55 products that would be purchased for people that potentially have those conditions. We've just done one with eczema where people have skin conditions. We had bought product for skin conditions. And we had huge response, like compared to just a blanket sort of email, quite strong. And now we're just looking at working in the area of our dispensed medicines, and we've contracted with another outsourced consultant who's a clinical naturopath to define journeys that will be beneficial around particular health conditions that are on prescription. So they've got medications that are on scripts, and some of the evidence that sort of backs up putting some minerals, supplementation, herbs with the medication that's been prescribed by the doctor is quite staggering in the sense of improving outcomes for the patient. And that's what it's all about, making sure the patient gets the best outcome.
Well, that's one of the key reasons where you get customer loyalty, isn't it? When they're no longer a customer, but they're more a family member where they trust you.
Yeah, and that's what I say about differentiation. The way that we're trying to differentiate is to get really close and know our customer and know them, not just from a hi, how are you, Quentin? It's like understand you and understand what you are and what you need. And I think that's the part, that understanding. And we're very fortunate. We've got data systems that give us the ability to do that interrogation, and then we can start to talk to the customers. And the customers come in and give us that feedback.
Are there any business lessons that you could think of?
One of the things I stress to sort of a lot of my business associates and partners is that it really is up to them to do their self-development. As I said, I was fortunate that I was sort of in a position where I was invited by a large corporate to go on trips and learn lots of things. But I think these days, it's part of, if you want to be in business, it's part of a must-do. Go and do some courses. I still go to AIM courses myself. I still do a lot of self-development in areas that I think I need to improve skill sets. It's usually human resource related these days, because it's sort of, I find as you sort of progress your career, you tend to end up doing much more in the human resource area and the analytics around people and how to try and engage best to get optimised outcomes for your own business outcomes.
What's the bigger vision? What's the vision or the end goal for?
Our goal, when we did that work with Retail Oasis and developed the brand, we also got involved with another consultancy that was much more business focused, and they helped us develop out a plan to travel across Australia. So we needed to get to around about 40 sites in WA, so we've achieved that this year. And then the goal was to penetrate into Northern Territory and South Australia. Many years ago, when I say many years ago, it must be about 25, 30 years ago, I was involved with some fellows in this state, and we ran a business called Synergy Pharmacy Services, which was a brand that we took nationally with some pharmacists on the East Coast as well. We ended up with about 130 member stores in that, and my responsibility was around setting up all the inventory procurement conditions with all the suppliers. I dealt with about 100 suppliers, all big pharma, small suppliers, etc., and negotiated best price withdrawal for single unit item from a warehouse. that was unheard of in those days, but we got compliance and it was quite successful. But it had about, I think, 18 shareholders, 6 pharmacist directors, and it all became too hard. So that actually got sold off to Symbion, I think it was, certainly Falling Symbion, because they converted their name at some stage. And then they took that and the bones of that really developed into what is now Symbion's Pharmacy Choice, which has about 800 pharmacy members. But there's still some elements within Pharmacy Choice that were sort of based around the old Synergy systems. That was a pretty hectic time. I used to travel up and down the East Coast with a couple of the other directors every third week.
Yeah.
That was pretty impacting on family. I didn't like that. I remember sitting at dinner one night saying to the kids, "Oh, there's this business opportunity and I think we need to maybe move east." And they said, "Well, see you, Dad." That was it. So I thought, "Oh, well, I'll have to just do the tripping away." I did that for about 18 months, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend doing that.
My question I always ask is the balance between family and business. And is there such a thing, especially now when you're trying to expand your business and scale it? Is there such a thing as balance?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of people can get lost in that, but I think it's really important to sort of think about what you're doing at the time. As I said, I had a rule that I never used to take work home, and I prefer to stay at the business for a period so I didn't disrupt the focus at the time with family. So that changes over time. Once your kids are left home, you don't have to live to that rule. But I still have a wife. She still works. She actually works in Razor Business Solutions upstairs, which is the accounting side of the business, or back-end bookkeeping side of it. So it's got to be balanced to say, well, we as a couple need our time. I'm very fortunate that she's sort of quite business orientated and is happy for me to do that. But I think it's for young people starting off, they've got to make sure that what they're doing is what they really want to do, and then they balance it to say, well, if I've got a family, I need to make sure I've got time for my family. Otherwise, you just lead to disasters, and that's not good.
And how vital is having that support, that partner?
Critical. Absolutely critical. If your partner is not interested in you working long hours, and pharmacy is long hours, you don't do a 38-hour week owning a pharmacy, it's more like 50, 60. So if your partner can't cope with that, you're going to have problems being a proprietor. So that's one of the primary things I'd say you have a chat. There's obviously significant, or can be significant, financial rewards that come to those that are prepared to do that. But you don't want to sort of take the financial rewards and end up sort of in a divorce or losing 2/3 of your assets anyway, so what's the point?
Exactly. Just got a couple more questions, Lyndon, and one of the questions is looking back, just reflecting back on your journey, and for a younger Lyndon who may be watching this, and any one piece of advice that you would share to your younger self who's coming up through the ranks?
Probably not to be a trailblazer too often. In my younger years, I was very prepared to jump on board a new idea, and I would obviously put some money behind it, etc. It's probably better to sort of try and balance that out a little bit, because you can burn a lot of time and energy and financial outcomes. So I'd probably say that just being a little bit cautious and taking a step back rather than being too enthusiastic to jump in. But you've also got to balance it with your gut, because sometimes your gut just says, this is right, I've got to do this. And I'm a great believer in that sort of internal sort of recognition that comes with that.
Compass.
Yeah. And a lot of that's based around, I think anyway, your experiential outcomes. So now I can sort of feel pretty comfortable when I look at a site and go, I think there's upside in that site. I've had enough experience to sort of say that there's a good balance here to do this. But probably in my younger years, I was a little bit too intrepid.
Gotcha. And what are you currently working on at the moment?
We're sort of really focused on trying to develop a lot of those personalisation outcomes for our customers. Because as I said, that's the key to this differentiation that we're focused on. So that's really primary. We're dabbling in a bit of IT tech. I've invested in a app called Packapill, which is got delivery systems for pharmacy medicines. There's a large corporate doctor group involved in that, another pharmacist as well in there as investors, and it's also got telehealth outcomes. It's got capacity for instant scripts, things like that. So we're doing a bit of that as well to help in the context of what we're needing in our sort of brand. So that's always now a driver for me. I think about what is needed for my brand, so that I sort of focus in any outside investments. So I do a bit in those areas.
So you got, I think from memory, I've been speaking to Amelia, 37 branches of, is that correct?
Yeah, there's sort of, well, other than a couple of delays because of landlord or lack of landlord assignments on leases, there should be 40 by January. That's including Casuarina. So 39 here and one in NT.
And let's say the goal for 2022, this time next year, when we're sitting down, what's
I'm hoping that in this day we'll have 50 franchisees, and I'm hoping between NT and South Australia we'll have 10.
Perfect.
So our goal is to get to 60. We've got some really slick onboarding sort of systems, so we're very comfortable to be able to onboard stores, 20 stores in a year's of fair growth rate. But we've done a lot of research and work, and I think we've done about 40 conversions over the period anyway. So that's helped us understand it. And interestingly, all of the new franchisees that have come on board, they speak accolades of the systems and support that we've applied to their transition. So that's been quite rewarding to actually have that feedback.
One more question before we go into a game.
This
is a game that we play at the end. But the question is, I know that you mentioned self-development and how vital that's been to where you are. You surround yourself with consultants and people who are just a higher level, and being in that circle of I'd say, influence has got to where you are today. How vital, how important is mentorship, and for you especially, for those who are watching this who might be looking for a bit of guidance?
Continue trying to drive my business associates into growth areas, personal growth areas, so that they can take up particular areas. And I've been really fortunate that some of the younger pharmacists have got incredible skill sets, clinical, aged care, those sort of areas. And you can't be best of all breeds in all areas. Yeah. So I've always focused on trying to make sure that we get people in our organisation that are far better at doing something than me. I think anyone who's been in the industry for the length of time I have, or even within the last sort of 10 years, your clinical skills sort of start to probably sort of dissipate. You're still aware of things, but you're not right on the cutting edge. And I always talk to the younger pharmacists. I openly say to my friends, if you really want good clinical advice in our stores, talk to the young pharmacists, because they've got it rather than me. I know certainly enough, and I've got to keep the CPD up and all that. Yeah. I sort of work to try and have people that are better at things than me, and we sort of delegate into that area.
I'm sure with your leadership and with your vision, you've got a whole team that's flying the flag for you as well. So it just works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I think if you treat them as equals, you find that there's longevity with their employment, and that's a critical part, because then you can stabilise your business model. We've got some real long-termers here, 25 plus years, many of them in the sort of 10-year plus brackets now, so it's really pleasing. It was interesting, I went to a function, it was just one of the girls' 40th birthdays the other night, and there's quite a few old employees, and every one of them said they wish they'd never left. Now I don't know whether they just saying it because I was there, but they actually sort of said, it's not always as green on the other side of the fence as you might think. So.
We're going to go into a bit of a game. The game is very simple. I'm just going to give you a couple of words, and I just want you to throw back a word or phrase of what my word means to you.
Yep.
All right, so first word, family.
Children, love, good times.
Okay, second word, let's go success.
Satisfaction.
Okay. Self-development.
Growth.
Let's go with mentorship.
I suppose in some ways the word is frustration. And I suppose I qualify that because often you're trying to mentor people that are not really sort of wanting to do the self-development. Yeah. And then I find frustration.
That's where challenges.
Love them.
And last word, legacy.
Probably to be remembered as an individual with integrity.
Guys, thank you so much for enjoying this episode of Fan of the Brand. As always, I want to remind you to smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell, because we have some of the most unbelievable and inspiring interviews coming up very soon, and I wouldn't want you guys to miss out. And also, if you're someone with passion, someone with purpose, and someone with a goal, looking to create your personal brand, then I welcome you to join our swag community of action takers and like-minded entrepreneurs from around the world who are on the mission to build a life of success and significance for themselves and their families. Want to know more? Simply click the link below and join our community today. Looking forward to seeing you either there or on the next inspiring video of Fan of the Brand.